Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for February 24th, 2025. Well, the big news from here in Europe was the German elections yesterday, which in a sense was big news, but nothing really changed. The election took place under what Helga Zepp-LaRouche has described as a NATO-European Union bubble. That is, the narrative was essentially to treat the situation as though there's not a serious crisis and that it's acceptable to have a candidate like Friedrich Merz from the Christian Democrats become the chancellor. Now, I'll go through the vote totals in a moment, but what's interesting is that the first thing Merz said after it was declared that he was the winner is that Europe must declare its independence from the United States. Interesting question. Does that mean he recognizes that Europe has been controlled entirely by the United States? And how would that take place? How would that change? We know in the next couple of days, Macron will be in Washington to meet with Trump. Later in the week, British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer will be in Washington to meet with Trump. What are they going to propose? Well, Macron is going to propose a 30,000-person peacekeeping force from Europe in Ukraine. Now, the reality is that the real election issue should have been how to end the war in Ukraine. Secondly, how to revive the German economy, which is going through a collapse, largely due to the deindustrialization caused by the loss of energy. The other issues should have been relationship with Russia, getting to the bottom of who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines, stopping the censorship. These issues were largely kept out of the election, and it was somewhat of a transactional discussion around why it's necessary to keep the Alternative for Deutschland out of the government. Now, this was an absurd approach because the Alternative for Deutschland was one of the few parties that actually discussed some of these issues, the war, energy, and so on. But it also did not offer a big picture alternative. Now, the other thing that's worth noting is that there's a very high turnout. 83.5% of the voters, registered voters, voted, which means people were interested in the race, but they didn't have a clear picture of what they were voting for, why Germany's in a crisis, and what has to be done. What they did show is their contempt for the coalition government of Scholz's Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Free Democrats. The Free Democrats didn't even get enough votes to get back into the Bundestag. So the CDU finished with about 28.5%. It's up by 4.4% from the last election, but not substantial. The Alternative for Deutschland was second with 20.8%, a jump of 10.5%. The Social Democrats of Scholz got 16.5%. That's down almost 10%. The Greens, 11.7%. They're down 3%. And those are the most important votes. One somewhat of an anomaly is the Linkspartei, the left party, jumped by 8.8%. Now, where did that come from? That's an interesting thing that we're going to have to take a look at and figure out. Now, the clear thing is that there are no parties in Germany outside of perhaps the Alternative for Deutschland that are fighting for the interests of the German people. And that's why you have this question hanging over everybody. What's going to happen with Ukraine? We've seen Trump moving very aggressively toward an alliance with Russia, or at least, let's say, a normalization, which could, as Trump is saying, end up with a cooperative alliance. Now, it's clear that things are going to change rapidly. Ryabkov, a leading Russian figure, said that a Trump-Putin meeting is moving ahead. We don't know when it'll be, but there are preparations for that started with the meeting last week in Riyadh, where Secretary of State Rubio met with the Foreign Minister of Russia, Lavrov. Now, what will Europe do? How is Europe going to fund their defense if they're going to go it alone? Well, the British press over the weekend went nuts. They said a French-British alliance will have to form a nuclear umbrella to protect Europe from an expected threat of Russia. Now, first of all, the idea that they're being threatened by a Russian invasion is a complete intelligence fraud. There's no evidence of that. It's just the standard line that Putin and the Russians are the bad guys. Secondly, the idea of a British nuclear deterrent, the Brits depend almost entirely on the United States for their nuclear weapons capability. The French have the force de frappe, which is an independent nuclear capability. Do the French really want to risk losing Paris for the sake of defending the neo-Nazi regime in Kiev? The second big question is who's going to fund the military buildup in Europe? If they're talking about moving from below 2% of the GDP for most countries to 4 to 5%, where's that money going to come from? It's going to come from social spending. It's going to come from infrastructure. It's going to come from credit that is needed for reviving industry and trade. So and it also means they're going to have to increase the amount of credit available, probably lower interest rates. But what is that going to do? It will create an inflationary bubble, but it still won't provide the independent military capability that they need if they really are prepared to go to war with Russia. The solution is Shaktian economics. They're on a course similar to what the Nazis took in 1933 when they made Hjalmar Schacht, their finance minister. And what he did is he generated credit for the war industries, at the same time destroyed the unions, lowered the wages, and created a slave labor system in the concentration camps, which was designed for the short-term bailout of Germany to enable them to fight wars on whose behalf? Well, the ultimate goal of World War II, from the standpoint of the British geopoliticians, was to pit Germany against Russia. And that's, in fact, what the major arena in World War II was, with the Russians losing somewhere over 26 million people, but ultimately crushing the German offensive and defeating Germany with some help from the United States at the end as a mop-up operation. Now, the problem with this is Shaktian economics will be highly unpopular. Austerity has already been imposed by the European Union countries. The economic policies of Europe are catastrophic. Deindustrialization for the sake of the green transformation, which is a nonsensical, anti-scientific idea. Now, keep in mind that the reality is that this means that Europe is likely to remain under the influence of the ideology of British geopolitics. And that's, if you look at the London papers, that's what they're basically saying. Now, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, put out a statement yesterday saying that there will be a permanent state of emergency for Europe. And what does that mean? That means more censorship. That means top-down control over spending. What it really means is we're about to see a possible breakup of the European Union as the nations of Eastern Europe, such as Romania, Croatia, Slovakia, even Bulgaria, are moving away from Brussels. And what's Germany going to do? Well, what Helga Zepp-LaRouche said in her statement on the election today was quite important. She said the way out for Germany is cooperation with the BRICS. Restore relations with Russia and begin trading with the BRICS to join the global majority. And she said to do this, German citizens must become more active if a positive future for Germany is to be secured. Good advice, something that you don't get from any of the leading so-called politicians and leaders in Germany. So we'll have more over the next couple of days on the fallout of the election, the emergence of the coalition talks, and everything else. But the important thing is that the election of Merz means that Germany is stuck in this transatlantic confrontation with Russia. If Merz is to be believed, by breaking with the United States, they're going to be, you might say, in a canoe without a paddle, with holes in the canoe. And that's the status of the situation in Germany the day after the election.